Welcome to Canada's podcast. So, Julian, welcome to Canada's podcast. I think it's really exciting to have, a fourth generation entrepreneur. And as I was saying to you earlier, one of the kind of iconic Canadian brands, Henry's. And what the question that I always ask at the beginning is, to tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey, why you started it, because I've read some of your background and it wasn't like diving in and staying at the beginning. Why you started it, what differences you encountered by, being that fourth generation, where it is today and where the future might be, because, never mind the technology in your business, but, the overall technology, that you've lived through some of the most significant changes in retail that have ever happened. Not some, the most significant changes in retail that have ever happened, I would say. So anyway, that was a big ask. Okay, so but over to you.
Right, I'll do it in a nutshell. So I am very proud to be the CEO of Henry's, Canada's greatest camera store. For those of you who don't know, we are the largest independent digital imaging retailer in the country. I've been running the business for the last 7 years, working in it full time for the last 13. But as it's a family business, so I'm actually, it's in my blood. I'm a family member and I'm the fourth generation, which is very hard to believe quite often and doesn't happen very much in North America, to be honest, to have such long running businesses. As you sort of hinted at, my career path is not exactly the career path when you looked at it that you would expect when you think of somebody running a family business. I saw the toll that the business took on my father as I was growing up. And as he was running the business, he actually had a heart attack in his late 40s. And it was absolutely not how I envisioned my life. So I went out. My passion was in community and diversity and corporate social responsibility. And so I actually had a very different life before Henry's, where I, focused on that. And it was after I'd had my own experience working in a very different field. There was a lot of diplomatic work, a lot of NGO work, and somehow I was able to find the connection between the two and found that there really was a place for me in the business. And so when I came back, I was able to lead a number of strategic initiatives, breaking down silos between different departments. And a lot of that experience that I'd had previously, sort of in that diplomatic space, actually helped me to navigate, build relationships throughout the business. And after I'd had that experience, then eventually took over as CEO. But absolutely none of this was a straight path. Never how I saw myself, but I quite love it. Quite love it.
Well, I'm looking behind you, because you're saying putting mental health into focus. That's one thing we can talk about. But before maybe that is the biggest challenge. What's the greatest challenge you faced in your business to date? And when I say you, I'm probably saying you and the family. You predominantly, but maybe there's something from the family side of it as well. I don't know.
Yeah. So I am the first, sadly, the first CEO in Canada to speak publicly about being diagnosed with a mental illness. Yeah. And I say sadly, I'm glad that I've spoken publicly about it, but statistically speaking, it's impossible that there are as many CEOs as there are in Canada, and that I'm the first one to actually speak about it. So, I mean, yeah, So it is something that has deeply impacted my life. It is something that has deeply impacted my family. So my family is also quite, we've all spoken more openly about it. It's a genetics that run through our family.
Mhm.
So we all are impacted by mental illness. And while the question was the challenges that I face, I actually wouldn't necessarily frame that as a challenge that I faced as my in my time as a CEO.
Mhm.
As that it's something that really impacted me when I was much younger, when I was first diagnosed in my early 20s,
Mhm.
and but by the time that I've sort of become CEO, learning how to manage it, being I have a strong support network, um, and so I'm very comfortable with it. And I think in many ways it has actually brought a lot of strength to my leadership, and um, how we make sure that there's the right kind of governance in place in the business, the right type of sort of systems for decision making, which I think are also, to be honest, just good business practices,
Mhm.
but things that I think others probably take for granted.
Mhm.
I'd say now the biggest challenge really is I look at our employees, and people in the world at large right now, and we've all been living through sort of in crisis mode for the last 2.5, 3 years,
Yeah.
right? And that's a really hard place to be. So, right now, it really is thinking about the well-being and the mental health
Mhm.
of our employees as we continue to push through all the challenges that we're all facing.
Yeah, I mean, without being too inquiring, you know, I was, retail is, you know, never mind COVID. I mean, it's taken a pounding with COVID. It took a massive pounding in the 90s and early 2000s with the arrival of e-commerce and whatever, um, how do you, you know, there's lots of entrepreneurial retailers, how do you overcome that kind of, the virtual commerce versus the real commerce, if you like, the physical
The
commerce?
physical.
Yeah.
I don't think it's about overcoming. I think it's about
Okay.
embracing.
Okay.
And I mean, we talk about how much retail has changed in the last little bit, and maybe it's that it's changed a lot in a short period of time. But if you look back over our history, retail has changed significantly, and it's always changed, right? We started off with, right, the general store, and then the
Mhm.
department store, and then big box. We all thought big box was going to be the end of the specialty channel, and then we've got e-com, and somehow like we're still here. And if anything, COVID, while it maybe shifted a lot of people to experiment more online and to incorporate e-com into their shopping habits, post, if you can say post COVID, or at least post lockdown world, we've seen it's clear that people truly do like a physical shopping experience. The
Mhm.
important part is embracing both, and so that digital experience is a really important part of the customer shopping journey. And so you need to make sure that you're digital, but you also have to be physical. And I think for us, the key is what's the value proposition? And the value proposition that we have is the expertise that we have in our stores, the sales associates, um, and the fact that you can come in and you can actually touch and feel a physical product. You can play with it, see how it feels in your hands. And then ultimately, it's being able to have a conversation and get inspired by other people who are interested in the same thing that you are. And you can't recreate that, at least not yet,
Mhm.
online. But you need to be there online so that when somebody is looking and doing their research, they're there And maybe they come into the store and they have the conversation, but then they go buy it online, and that's okay too. It's about understanding how they play together.
So next thing we see the Henry's metaverse is that. Where do you see the business in the next 5 years? We've got Web3 here and the metaverse and everything else, and we've got people buying real estate in the metaverse. And funny, I built one of the first virtual malls online in about 20 odd years ago. It was a bit too soon, but it was still the early metaverse.
Oh, neat.
Yeah. Where do you see it? What is it? I mean, or sit and wait. I mean, nothing wrong with sitting and waiting and something.
Yeah. It's a tough. To be honest, today, seeing past the next 6 months is really where the focus is. So I've got visions of 5 years from now, but as we emerge from COVID and then supply chain constraints, which are still things that we are feeling, it's hard to think that long term. The metaverse is definitely something that's interesting and curious to see how that will turn out. Mm-hmm. But I do see I see specialty retail in particular. I think it's different if you're big box. Something a little bit more transactional, but I think specialty retail still has a lot of life in it. And it's about finding different ways to engage with the customer, but we kind of need to see how that plays out. So the sit and wait isn't necessarily, as you said, a bad thing. It's about what does the customer want? And does the customer like shopping in the metaverse? If so, then we'll explore it. But I'm not sure that they do yet.
You grew up in a family business, and I mean, I always ask you about mentorship. And when you think about family, obviously you think about parents, father, mother, whatever, being the mentors. But I'm interested, is that really the case, or did you get your mentors? I think about my parents. I wouldn't necessarily, I worked in the family business for a while and then left, kind of thing. So I'm not sure that I learned from him more than I learned from a couple of other guys, basically. What is it? How does it work in a successful family business like Henry?
Well, thank you for putting it in that category.
You're still here after a hell of a
Still here. I'm still here. Yes.
That's success.
So I mean, obviously, like anybody, parents have a huge influence on who you are, right? Yeah. So I think what they have absolutely instilled upon both me and my sister, who runs our foundation, is our values, which are really important values for the business. And I think a big part of our success. So community, relationships, and I really can't emphasize the importance of the relationships when it comes to the business. So all of those things are things that they have absolutely sort of taught us growing up, but also demonstrated in how they ran the business. So I'll always speak to, my father. I've learned a lot from him in terms of how he ran the business, in terms of how he treated people, and how he would, make a deal. He loved to make deals, but the way that he, the way he did it, right, was very unique and really very endearing. And that led to the long-term success of the business. But there's also things now that the world is very different. And so there's things that we do very differently. Retail in particular is very different, as we were talking about previously, from when my father was running the business to what it is today. It used to be about, putting as much inventory as you possibly could in the store, stacking it as high as possible, and people would come in and buy it. Yeah. It's just not that straightforward anymore. And so when it comes to understanding modern business, modern leadership, I'm like anybody else, surrounding myself by lots of other people who can, give me advice. And I look to lots of other people to understand, different ways in which we can run the business today.
What do you see as a key piece of advice? And let's stay in retail, because that's really the knowledge base that you bring. What advice would you give if some, because we have lots of people that are thinking about going in and being an entrepreneur, if they're thinking about going into the retail space, what advice would you give them, as they're starting a business or thinking of starting a business? I mean, I know you weren't there at the start, but I think you have to restart every decade.
Absolutely.
No.
Well, I'm not sure it's really that different than any other business, and some of the basic principles, right? Surround yourself by people who are smarter than you. It's important that you can let your ego go by the wayside. For me, what's been really helpful is that I came into the business not claiming to be a retail expert. And so I was able to ask questions, and still do, to say, why do we do things this way? Because I think retail has a very, there's a lot of legacy in retail.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just the way we've always done it. And so to be able to question that, and have somebody, I consider myself, while I'm not a retail expert, I think I'm smart enough that if somebody can't explain it to me sort of in a few sentences, I can say, something doesn't feel right here. Let's rethink that. And I think in retail right now, you have to be really open to that. And then I would go back to the comment I said earlier about relationships. Over like time and time again throughout our history, and especially in the last few years throughout COVID and supply chain constraints, being able to draw on those relationships, whether it's with our customers, with our suppliers, with the bank, never underestimate those relationships. And when you're going to need to draw on those and to invest in them well before you need to actually, draw on them.
If you had to pick a word to describe yourself, what would it be and why?
A polite word. Resilient. Resilient would be the word. And it's why I've always been somebody that's managed to pick myself back up again and keep going. And again, the last few years, it's to be able to keep going through this.
How do you do that? We all hit challenges. Is there some kind of process that Gillian has? When you hit that wall, shit, I got to solve it. How do you?
Yeah. Well, so some would call that like stubbornness, pigheadedness, determination, perseverance, depends on how you want to look at it. I'm somebody that just says there's got to be a way. We're going to figure this out. And I'm a believer in having a North Star, and you have that North Star, and you may not know exactly how you're going to get there. So if one way doesn't work, you try another, but you just keep going, because forward is the only option.
So a bit of fun. Are you a morning or a night person? I ask everyone that.
I'm a mid-morning person. I always feel like morning or night is too extreme. Like, I'm not a 5 a.m.er,
Yeah.
but I like to be productive in the morning, not in the evening.
Not in, okay. A bit back to the mentor thing. What would you say is the best piece of advice you've ever received that you kind of carry around in your pocket?
That being, and I think it's the same whether it's a CEO, a leader, an entrepreneur, is a marathon and not a sprint. You got to pace yourself and take care of yourself.
Yeah. And I'm curious, what do you see as what do you really see as the big opportunity in your particular segment of retail? And I was going to say 5 years, but I'm not going to, because we don't know what's happening. The next, 24,
the next week,
24 to 36 months, at least 24 months.
For us, what I'm really excited about is the growth of content creation. So this podcast is a perfect example, right? We're doing this,
Yes.
right, with video. We're doing it with audio. It's being streamed on multiple different platforms. So content creation, whether it's podcasting, YouTubing, TikToking, Instagram, all of that is new and exciting. And for us, I think what's really fun is that this is it's a new customer segment that is developing, like we're all developing at the same time together. So nobody's serving this community particularly well. And we're all trying to figure out how to do that as it emerges. Because if, a few years ago, you wouldn't have
thought a few years ago. I mean, I grew up in the media business, and here I am doing national broadcast on Zoom from my, not from there.
Exactly.
You can't see what's behind me. So it's so different,
Mm-hmm.
the last 5 years, really. 6 years. We maybe could see it 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, whatever. There is change. What's the most exciting piece of change, let's say, in your business that you think? You talked a little bit about it with the content side, but I'm sort of talking more, well, that's kind of the commerce side of it as well, but I'm talking more on the transactional side, the experience side, not in terms of what you're selling, but in terms of the customer experience with you.
I think what is great is that the customer now has far more knowledge and is more educated, and the customer is in the driver's seat. And so while not everybody loves that, I think it creates a whole new opportunity to be able to serve people, to be able to understand what the customer wants. And I think that the businesses that are well connected to their customer and understands them, then really have an opportunity to thrive and to succeed. And I think that's somewhere where, again, whether it's Henry's or specialty retail in general, has a really great opportunity ahead of them.
Good. What's keeping you up at night?
My kids.
Apart from your kids.
I think there's still it's a lot of uncertainty, right? How are things going to unfold? We're still dealing with supply chain, and nobody's totally clear on how that's going to unfold or ultimately what that's going to look like in the end. Like in the electronic space, it's still a big unknown. So for us, that's really big. And the economy, what's going to happen there? How's that going to impact consumer demand? There's a lot of uncertainty in the world. So trying to, as you said, the question about like, what's the business going to look like in 5 years? There's a lot of big question marks out there.
That's interesting. Let's move on to the mental health thing. I don't want to we touched on it briefly, but why did you decide to kind of step out and say, hey, we've lived with mental health in generations of the Stein family kind of thing. What made you decide that?
So the trigger, defining moment, was I was at a funeral. Somebody that I know had died by suicide, and I was at the funeral, and this was maybe 4 years ago, 5 years ago, so not that long ago. And nobody at the funeral talked about why this woman, so a mother, a wife, a daughter, nobody spoke about how she passed away. And I was just floored that in this day and age, we talk about mental health. Nobody would talk about it. And how are you supposed to learn from it? How's your family supposed to grieve? How do you move on if you can't talk about it. And maybe, and obviously if it had been, clearly there was some stigma in this family that they couldn't talk about it and therefore couldn't have helped before this happened. And I just remember sitting there thinking, we are a successful family in the world of, I guess, from a,
Yeah.
way you define success, right? As a successful business owners with sort of the like long-term credibility behind us.
Mhm.
And thinking about me personally, thinking about our family, just thought if we don't talk about it, then like are we just perpetuating the same stigma to continue? And so for me, I mean, that I said that was 4 or 5 years ago. It took me a long time to get up the courage to actually do it, because you sort of think, well, why is it that nobody else has done it? But ultimately, to me, I felt that I have a platform and that I need to use that and to show people that you can be successful. So it doesn't need to hold you back, but you do need to talk about it and you do need to get help and support to be able to do that. And so I thought I really needed to set that example.
So on that front, Gillian, that's why I wanted to talk to you. Is say someone's listened to this and said, "What can I do?" Where can they go to help you? Basically.
Well, I'd say it's a challenge right now. Our healthcare system is really not set up for this. So, I mean, I can plug. There's the Henry's Foundation. I think is a good place to start. So that's our foundation that we've set up in support of mental health. And it does have a number of resources on the website that can sort of guide you to where you may be looking. But I always say, just talk to somebody, whether it's your family doctor, a friend, someone at work. Do you check to see if you have an EAP program at work or, at school? Talk to somebody. That's the most important thing, is to start talking.
That's great. We're at my time limit. I'm looking. I could talk all afternoon, but if someone's heard something, now how can they get a hold of you, Gillian? What's the sort of the public way to get a hold of you?
The easiest way is LinkedIn. So Gillian with a G.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for coming on the Cannabis Podcast. It was a lot of fun. Really been good meeting you.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Philip. This was great.